r/NoSleep. Posted by u/Nightnator. The creature in the moonlight. You see, at this point in time I feel confused, dazed, incredibly confused, more confused than I have been at that insane asylum. When that disgusting old man plunged needles into my bare skull, it still hurts. Sometimes it does, other times I've learned to suppress and forget. Thinking makes the pain worse. Was it to suppress my thinking? To render me a fool? They haven't been successful at that. Or I wouldn't be delivering you this story, would I? About that disgusting man, about him, I must tell you at some other length in this story. For now, my mind and soul alike are preoccupied with some abnormal fear, abnormal for its source alone is preternatural and hideous, for its revelation alone sent me racing out into the dismal tundra, and only the horrifying fear of freezing to death brought me again into the home of the monster. Yes, the monster. You see, they called me mad, they called me some other profanities, but above all, they called me mad, insane. But would you behave sanely in this cynical world? Would you enjoy those needles or that old man's eye? Even the reminiscence of those eyes sends a shiver down my spine, oh God. So, for many weeks straight I saw the horror before me, I saw blasphemy unfold, I saw those patients, barely human, I saw them clawing, gnawing, their gnarly faces convulsed in undignified haste, convulsed and contorted in uncontrollable fear. For years I thought I saw a doctor working, only to realize I saw the devil. At length there happened to me such a hideous set of events which sent me racing out of that asylum. At length the changes in my body and the lust of a peculiar kind made me escape that asylum. At first, the institution occurred to me genuine, for I had been feeling better than at my own abode in Vermont, wherein I was deemed untreatable, wherein in my hallucinogenic state I killed my valet, Nancy. Upon being transferred to the asylum, early treatment subsided those V's on. I felt an acute sharpness in my senses. As the day progressed my hearing abilities grew sounder. At night slight chirping of the whippoorwill or even the groan of a patient awakened me. Another set of changes which I further observed was the deterioration of my motor abilities. The normal act of walking was reduced to painful crippling. Towards evening my ability to see would give way and only the fading outlines of the willows was available. As evenings progressed into nights, my body would convulse with pain, my stomach ached and groaned, my body yearned for food, and no ordinary means of food would suffice the hunger. As the days went by my hunger grew vicious, and nearing the weeks of escape the hunger became insatiable. Then, there happened to me such a curious set of an event which fueled my anger for that old man, which sent me and the other prisoners into a manic state which lasted for a whole night. It was night when, to alleviate some of the persistent maladies, I thought to look outside into the vast plains of nothingness, where gigantic willows stood like purveyors of portents of death. It was eerily silent, and even for the amplification in my hearing abilities I couldn't hear anything. Then, the sirens blared, and through my window I could spot in the far distance few guards running into the dense canopy, preferably behind a fleeting patient who somehow got past the initial perimeter. Havoc ensued, and those sirens blasted death onto my ears. Those sirens were unnaturally loud, and soon my ears began to bleed as well. I then heard guardrails rattling, confused screaming, heavy footsteps in the corridor, some intense buzzing every now and then as of some electrical nature, and a very distant screaming of one of the guards. More footsteps sounded above our floor. Soon, I saw what made those guards scream. Soon, I learned as to why no ordinary means of food wouldn't suffice my hunger. Soon I saw what that devil turned his patients into, morphed me into as well. The horror began in the floor above me and subtly progressed downstairs, to the other corridors, and finally, it showed its grotesque face right before me. In front of me what went down was a massacre, as few of the prisoners somehow got out of their darn cells. In no exaggeration, the corridor in front of me was a compound of disgust. It was everything that is unwholesome, disgusting, disturbing, and unsettling. At first, it seemed to me animals had eaten up the guards. Then as they ran past me bloodied, battered, and bruised, I finally saw one ungodly abomination nearly ate a few of them alive. They were the other patients from the D block, where more advanced stage patients were kept for treatment. In front of me I saw, few of them quite possibly in the latter stages of the disease, limping awkwardly, some of them missing limbs, whilst some of them the whole of their lower part of the torso. Their sunken eyes, tainted in a dismal shade of red, one of them passed a grin at me as he went past me. The guards were now screaming for backups on their radios whilst still crawling with agonizing pain towards the exit to the infirmary. I immediately freed myself from my cell with a wooden key which I had carved earlier. Would a madman have been able to do that? Ha ha ha. Brushing past the corpses, a strange guttural groan rose in my belly and my hunger grew worse. In front of me one of the patients from the D block, evident from the clothing, For each block, patients were given a separate set of clothing to distinguish the more vulnerable patients from the lesser ones. Was calmly chewing a guard. He motioned for me to join him, his eyes a pale shade of red like the previous one. The hunger in my stomach grew worse and immediately I turned away from the horrid scene, for I had but a speck of time with me. I then looked for the vent which opened into an attic-like feature in the backside of the facility, the blueprint of which had been very diligently laid out by Fred, one of the patients involved in my plan. After which the second stage of my plan unfolded, which included hurling a makeshift rope made out of bedsheets onto the squalid, grassy surface beneath and then inconspicuously climbing out of the barbed fenced wires. Earlier I had justified fears of armed guards walking around in the watchtowers, but that night the watchtowers were strangely empty. I know not whether it was some sort of emergency protocol or somehow those sets of guards met the same fate as the guards working in the DNC blocks, but I paid little attention. However, you must notice it was not the breaking out of the supposed facility that was too tedious or arduous, but the climbing of the barbed wire fences, to break out of the final perimeter, which proved to be a daunting task, and once I was out, surviving in the snow-laden landscape seemed a distant dream. I soon became limping due to some unforeseen pain in my kneecap. Crawling and floundering at the edge of the woods as the shades of the dawn drew on, I found myself being greeted by a cozy Gothic-style, two-story building. Its arched, snow-laden roofs reminding me of my own abode in Vermont. Beside it lay a frozen lake which upon looking sent a wave of distress and dread into my shivering body. There onward I learned a vile truth, which upon a cursory glance might seem satisfying but upon further inspection justifies as to why I write this, as to why it's sheer wastage of precarious energy to look for any kind of help. Therefore 3 nights straight I stalked my prey. For 3 nights alone I lived off scraps from his own kitchen and starved in frantic anticipation. For 3 nights and day like I dreamt of doing things to that man, to that old man. The doctor who turned me into a living corpse, into a living abomination. So, as aforementioned, by some insane stroke of luck I stumbled upon the doctor's abode. During the day his home remained empty and I was free to roam and eat whatever I liked, but everything about that stupid place abhorred and disgusted me. For the strange portraits in the attic I loathed, strange were the angles he drew. At night, however, each night you must see, I sauntered quietly into his bedroom, careful as to not wake the beast. Each night I quietly and stealthily walked into his room to strangle the old man, to rid me of my malady, but fear, a numbing fear, stopped me from performing the deed. Lust for his flesh I had none, greed for his wealth I had none. It was the insidious anger which had kept me on my feet for those 3 days. Gradually, I began taking risks. Sometimes unintentional, other times just out of pure amusement. Gradually, I began to wander for a longer duration in his bedroom, moving things, making queer sounds, to disturb his sleep. Some days, he used to wake up in the dead of the night and would listen for oddities. At those moments I made sure to remain still, his curtains sealed shut so that no outside light ever shone into his room. At those moments I recall his facial expressions, his fear-draped face, confusion, stark terror oozing out of every orifice. As my hunger grew worse and worse over the course of 3 days I grew more clumsy and lackadaisical around him. I had no intentions of hurting him even on the 3rd night of my stay in his abode. However, as I was closely inspecting his sleeping body, he opened his eyes. He opened both of his eyes. At first, you must visualize my botched situation. At the most distance I was just a foot above the old man, lingering in balance, frozen in mid-air. I hoped to remain still right in front of him and hoped for the old man to go back to his sleep. I then heard of a slight whimper, and I knew it was a groan of deep fear, a fear which has stalked everyone in their early years but never quite departing. Without wasting any more time, I acted on impulse and took the old man by his neck. I underestimated what 3 days of starvation do to a human body, which remains true even in my abnormal case. The old man pretty easily tackled me to the ground, wherein I got a good smack at his lower jaw. He then attempted to grab something from under his pillow when I grabbed hold of his waist and plunged him into his window, which broke and feeble rays of moonlight entered his sinister bedroom. I then saw something which even in the dire circumstances I was under made my stomach crawl, and my blood cold. There, standing in front of the broken panes, was a man. Barely man, you must notice, for his eyes were a pale shade of red, just like mine, just like all the patients at the facility, and in his hand was a loaded revolver. Now, even if I wouldn't have taken the drastic measure to jump from his 2nd-story window, I wouldn't have gotten too far in the woods, for the temperature and the wind, oh God. The wind made the pain even worse. It stings now. The old man was wise. He didn't ring anyone, nor did he attempt to find me. He knew I was done and dusted, but crawling ever slightly during the course of the cold night I made my way to his garret once again. And here I'm writing this not in an attempt to get out my story but just to pass the night, to get surcease from the unceasing pain. Tomorrow I must finish what I started. In my periphery, I can make out tools of various kinds. It is a crowbar I'm looking for. Crowbar? You must ask why a crowbar? A crowbar, for it is easier to go for the head this way.